just introducing Devon Ziminski is a senior research project administrator at the Senator Walter Reed Institute for Public Affairs at Rutgers University. And once we get her mic setting situated, she's going to discuss her project focused specifically on the city of Camden.
All right, well, let's get started. A little technical difficulty on a Fridays happens. Thank you. I'm not sure, Michael, if you said anything because I couldn't hear you. But if I should just get right into it. Okay, I'm just going to go forward. I don't hear anything, and I can't see anything on the other screen. But thank you, everyone, for joining me on this Friday afternoon. My name is Devon Ziminski, and I work at the Senator Walter Reed Institute for Public Affairs at Rutgers University, Camden. And I also am a PhD student in the Rutgers University School of Social Work. So I spend a lot of time on the turnpike, and I've eaten many meals in my car. And today I'll be talking about a homicide and intimate partner violence case analysis. And I think all the breakout sessions right now are related to interpersonal violence and intimate partner violence. And so kind of in the next 20 to 25 minutes, I want to leave some room for Q&A. And please just jump in. I know people are going to be writing some things in the chat, so would love to hear what other folks' thoughts are. And I'm not sure where everyone's coming from too, so I'll talk a little bit about Camden County and the city in the next coming slides. But I'm going to kind of go through the project background, some background about Camden, and then talk about the research methods for this project, and then kind of what we found so far. And then I'd also love to hear again what other people's thoughts are for kind of next steps and future directions. And so to start off, this project really came about, when the Gun Violence Research Center was soliciting ideas around interpersonal violence. And so this project focuses on intimate partner violence and the definitions up there, and the relationship between intimate partner violence that results in homicides and the use of firearms in those incidents. And like many folks have talked about today, a lot of the information and data sets that we have, not only for firearms, but for other things related to firearms, whether it's mental health or intimate partner violence or other, experiences of poverty, are really kind of muddled, and they're not comprehensive in one place. And so the data used in this study was publicly available data that the Camden County Prosecutor's Office had about homicides that have occurred over the past 15 years, but that no one, to my knowledge, has looked at. So a lot of it was kind of pulling the data and then taking a look at how can we understand what this means for the relationship particular to Camden County and Camden City in this area. So hopefully there'll be future ways to look at this. And this project is really focused, again, in the county of Camden, and so it's not generalizable. It's really an exploratory portrait of how can we start to get this data and then continue to think about these relationships. So I want to give a little background about Camden County and Camden City for those that may not be familiar. I took the liberty of adding some pictures from a recent program evaluation we did called A New View Camden, if you want to look it up. That was around illegal dumping and environmental racism in Camden. But the point of this slide is really to just show the differences between Camden City, which is a city that has been plagued by really negative narratives and perceptions, and that due to a lot of intentional structural inequity and intentional divestment has gone through different periods of stagnation and growth. And so because of those intentional structural inequities and policies, we see that a lot of the metrics around the number of people experiencing poverty, household income, high school graduation rates are vastly different than the Camden County as a whole, and then in comparison to New Jersey. And so it's just important to keep in mind that even though, this conversation today is around intimate partner violence and firearms, all of these things, it could be mental health or, as I said, poverty related to firearms, are all kind of part of the social determinants of health and how these things relate to different populations having vastly different experiences in their day-to-day lives. And so kind of continuing on what we have from Camden County and Camden City, I just wanted to show some of the changes over time with the violent crime rate that includes, homicides. And you can see that it has, and Dr. Semenza was talking about this earlier, the violent crime rate seems to have been going down, but in different populations, it's actually going up. But one thing to note here that is in 2013, the city of Camden's police force disbanded and became a county-wide force. So you do see those numbers decreasing since then. And these don't have the pandemic numbers in, but the data we have is in there. And then kind of switching gears to now taking our background of Camden and the city of Camden to the topic at hand. Intimate partner violence is a situation that men and women experience, and particularly intimate partner homicide, which is, that violence that ends up resulting in a death, accounts for about 1 in 4 homicide cases, and women are twice as likely to be shot and killed by their partners than murdered in any other way by a stranger. And then here's some other. This graph is also just, to center us within Camden County and Camden City. We see that because we don't have the intimate partner violence rates, we're using the domestic violence rates. Again, we see it's kind of been pretty stable over time over the past 15 years. And as other folks have mentioned today, during the pandemic, different statistics and numbers around domestic violence, sexual assault have increased, and so it'll be interesting to take this type of data into the future. And then this slide I'm actually going to skip past because this just talks about the relationships between folks that were, convicted of domestic violence from Camden County and Camden City. And really the point of this is just to show that if we add up the incidences from boyfriends, girlfriends, spouses, ex-partners, between the county and the city, they both add up to more incidents of domestic violence versus, acquaintances versus friends. And what we're interested here is more the rates around those partners, boyfriend, girlfriend, exes, and spouses. And so now kind of still moving along and thinking about, okay, we have the background of Camden, Camden City, and intimate partner violence. And now let's make the connection between intimate partner violence that ends up in intimate partner homicide and firearms. And there's been a whole host of research. I've cited Dan Simmons multiple times here because a lot of his work has done in this is not what he talked about today, but there's a well-established link between, the presence of firearms and increased homicides, and then also increased intimate partner violence that results in an intimate partner homicide, ranging from the presence of federal firearms dealers, and then also in research, it's already looked at the outcomes among different racial and ethnic groups. And as I said before, it really does tie back to the role that economic inequities and structural racism have played in, the lack of resources and opportunity in certain communities versus others, which is very apparent when you look at, city of Camden versus Camden County versus the state of New Jersey. And then things that we need to think about for the future are, in thinking about violence and firearms, the things related to access and if guns have been accessed through illicit means versus legal means are things that, there's still many areas of research to dive into. And so now to today's project, one more slide, just another fact about intimate partner homicide, again, related to firearms. Overall, intimate partner homicides have dropped, but they've risen when firearms are involved, which is another reason why this particular area was important to dig into to see what that looked like in Camden. And so again, here's the project rationale. Just as a refresher, we're looking at the relationship between intimate partner violence that results in homicides and whether there were firearms used and kind of the likelihood of that homicide occurring through a gunshot wound and a firearm. And so those research questions, there's 3 of them. I'm going to talk about the first 2. The third, haven't quite gotten to it yet, but that's for future. So the first one is, using this new data that we have, did the majority of homicides occur by firearms and through other means such as the blunt force trauma or stabbing? And then the second one, as I just said, are these homicides resulting from intimate partner violence more likely to have been executed by firearms through a gunshot wound? And so I'm going to pause here to talk a little bit about how we did this. And when I was thinking about this over the past couple of days and explaining this, I feel like this project is a really good example of how research is really an art and a science. And in this case, that's definitely true, because what we did was we took all of the homicides that were publicly available from the Camden County Prosecutor's Office, and we kind of hand pulled them, and because they were not in a user-friendly format, and then cataloged them from January 2007 until earlier this year in February. And so over that time, there was about a little over 700 homicides that occurred across Camden County, which included the city of Camden. And I will say we kept, through this case analysis, we kept it at the county level because that included the city of Camden instead of breaking it into Camden County versus the city of Camden, because just to keep the case numbers higher and to get as many homicides that are related to intimate partner violence as we could, instead of separating the two. So then after we got all of the kind of case data points, we then kind of did, and this is, my journalism background showing, we did a media search, like a content analysis of different articles and other publicly available police reports that were related to each homicide to see if there was additional information around the relationship between the victim and the suspect, and if there was any other information about that relationship. And for many of the cases, as you'll see when I report out the data in a minute, some of them had a lot of information. It was easy to see those connections. Others, it was not. And so after doing that, we ended up having about a little over 70 of these homicides that had that classification of confirmed intimate partner violence. And then after that, I will say too, I'm very glad I have a subscription to the Philadelphia Inquirer, because that was necessary for this. And then after that, I went through and did a bunch of kind of regression analysis that could go further, but for the purposes of today, I'll just talk about a few points. Okay, so then now I'm going to present a lot of kind of the demographic information that we got from after pulling the homicides. So the first one that I want to report is just the change over time from, over this 15-year period from 2007 until 2022. And just to note, the 2022 number looks really low in comparison to the others, just because we stopped collecting this data in February. I'm sure by the end of the year, we'll trend out to kind of the numbers that we've seen from 2018 to 2021. And again, you can see how they've kind of dropped since 2016. And then, but when we focus in on where the homicides are happening within municipalities, we really see that the majority of them are happening in the city of Camden, almost, just under 600. I think it was about 589 out of that 717. And then a couple of the other municipalities that have, more than the others are Pennsauken, Lindenwold, and Gloucester Township. And then when we look at the victim's sex information, the vast majority of the victim homicide sex was males versus females. But then, as we know, most of IPV, when we look at the sample just in IPV, it's majority females. But for the overall sample, the victims were predominantly male. And then age is another demographic variable that was available for all of the victims, and the majority were between 19 to 29, which also, tracks with what we know about, when criminal activity occurs kind of in the age of the life course and how it drops off drastically after, 30 to 35. And the average age of the victims was 30. And then here's really kind of where we start answering the first research question of, among these homicides, what was the cause of death? And we see that 78% of the homicides occurred through a firearm, death through a gunshot wound. And so that kind of confirms that suspicion in alignment with other, what the prior research has shown. And this will become important when we look at the relationship between IPV and the use of a firearm. And then when we were looking at, the baseline of the homicides and the suspects, this was where kind of, again, going back to the art and science, not all the cases had a suspect identified. And we also know that in a lot of homicide cases, there's not always a suspect identified. And then it's a whole other can of worms. But then, the people that, if anyone even gets prosecuted or brought to court, is even a very small percentage, depending on what jurisdiction you're in. But for these cases, there was, a decent amount, over half, that there was a suspect identified. And then through that, we were able to identify, as I said, like the relationship between suspects, where it was available, which, as you'll see in the next slide, for a lot, because there wasn't as much information available as one would hope, there's a lot of kind of NA unknown, and really only a small percentage that we were able to kind of confirm the likelihood of intimate partner violence that resulted in a homicide for these victims. And so then I'm just going to skip past the statistics, but really just focus on the findings and what we found. And so, as I said, the first research question around, these homicides have occurred by firearms, that was true, 78%. And then when we look at the second finding around the relationship between intimate partner violence that has resulted in homicides and the likelihood that that homicide was occurred through a gunshot wound, we do see there is a significant relationship. So in this, sample, victims who had died through likely intimate partner homicide were 36 percentage points more likely to die through a firearm. And when we change this into percentage, it actually comes out to around 45%, which is a very large number. And then another thing that I want to point to from the data is that when we look, I did some other tests related to looking at age and intimate partner violence and firearms, and sex and intimate partner violence and firearms. And what we see is that when we just look at the relationship between age and, firearm use in the homicide, we see that as age gets higher, the likelihood of death by gunshot wounds decreases, which would also kind of check out with what we all know about, people involved in crimes and things like that, that again, as you age, the likelihood of being involved in whether it's property or violent crime decreases. But when we add in like a interaction effect between intimate partner violence and age together on the likelihood of a gunshot wound, that relationship actually reverses. And what we see is that, as age increases by each year, the likelihood of death through that gunshot wound actually decreases, actually increases, suggesting that some of the victims of intimate partner homicide may be at an older age compared to those that have died by gunshot wound without intimate partner violence. But again, this is given the sample size and the small numbers that we have, it's can't say anything for sure, but it just suggests that some of those folks may have been older, given the fact that the overall age sample is still pretty young in comparison. And so really kind of in contextualizing this, I know I breezed through that really quickly. I just have one or two more slides, and then we will have good time for discussion. But really what this helps us understand is whether we're talking about intimate partner violence or other intimate partner homicide or other outcomes, just continuing to establish the relationships of whatever the outcome is and the presence and the prevalence of firearms. I don't think that can be emphasized enough in whatever outcome you're looking at. And this is an example where we're taking just Camden County, one county in New Jersey, and we have this available data. So let's see what it can help us understand about these relationships, to continue in future research to understand again how the prevalence of firearms escalates potentially, and a lot of times we know it does violence in situations. And this is also just a great opportunity to dig into data that, to my knowledge, hasn't been looked at before. And now that we've pulled all the data, we have a nice little data set that we can use, and to hopefully kind of help us think about ways that intimate partner violence can be tracked beyond other domestic violence measures, that New Jersey doesn't participate in all of those tracking measures. So to think about other ways that we can kind of get at that data and look at those relationships at the local or state level. And then when I think about kind of next steps, there's a lot of options for, additional analyses. And then, because at WRI, we're based in Camden, in the city of Camden, and we focus a lot of our research on localities and counties in southern New Jersey. It would be great to kind of explore these relationships in other areas in southern New Jersey that have higher rates of gun violence in Cumberland County, for example, Atlantic County. And then also to look at, again, some of those relationships with access to firearms and illegal versus illegal firearms. And then spatial analysis is forthcoming. And then a last idea I had, and I'm curious to hear what other people think too, is, again, I think because I have a background in journalism, to look at kind of another content analysis of that media bias that I would surmise exists in covering these not only deaths related to intimate partner homicides, with that relationship between when those intimate partner homicides occur by firearms. There is a Center for Gun Violence Reporting, but to think about what that looks like specifically in kind of the areas that we're in Camden County and the city of Camden. And so that's kind of my thoughts on that and what we have to date. As I said, my name's Devon. There's my email. I'll kind of stop sharing screen to go to questions. But thank you so much for spending your Friday afternoon with me. I hope everyone has a good weekend.
Okay, Devon, thanks for that great presentation. I see we have 2 questions from the audience. If no more come in and we still have a minute or 2, which we might, I have a couple questions, but okay. I will say mine on the back burner in case other things fill in. So the first question is, which states participate in the CDC Violent Death Tracker? Like you said, there were 8 of them.
I actually don't know which ones. I just know it's not New Jersey. Yeah. So I actually don't know which ones. I just know it's not New Jersey. But I can certainly find out and email you, or if you email me.
Okay. And I don't know if you want to leave your email address up on the screen.
Just I don't know. This is like, I'm trying to get back to, where I had it. Here we go. There's my email. Okay.
I'm not seeing it right now. I just reference this slide.
Oh, did we lose you, Mike? Right? Did Mike leave for everybody else, or it's just me? Because I don't see him anymore. Okay. Okay, yeah, maybe there's just a glitch in the system. Oh, no worries. Okay, I see a question here from Robert. Okay, you said which states participate in the CDC Violent Death Tracker, and then could you confirm the data on sex of victim? Are men or women more likely to use a firearm? So in this data that we pulled, all the data that we had from Camden County was from victims of homicide. So it's not the people that were using the firearm. It's unfortunately the people that were killed by a firearm. And so in that overall sample, the majority of those victims were men versus women. But then when we looked at the smaller sample of the victims of homicide through intimate partner violence, it switches, and the victims were majority female compared to male. But that, as I said, that sample was a lot smaller. Hopefully that answers your question. But I think, like, generally, from one of the presentations this morning, depending on what type of firearm violence you're looking at, those demographics in terms of who's perpetrator versus victim are going to be shifting. And so, Brielle, I see your question. Lifelong Camden County resident here. Based on the data you pulled, were you able to see a clear, vast difference in municipality demographics and rates of IPV. The broad answer is no. I think if we were to go in and see, we can definitely pull. I can go in and pull for each municipality the number. I don't have them off the top of my head. I'd have to go in and look at them. But yeah, we can see again, like with the demographics of just where the homicides are occurring. The vast majority occur in the city of Camden, and through that, the vast majority of the IPV cases are also occurring in the city of Camden. But we can look at, the differences between the municipalities. But it's just going to be a small number of those cases. And then, Michael, I see your question here. Do you suspect the patterns would be different in other New Jersey cities, counties, or in cities across the border in Delaware or PA? I don't think the patterns would be different, but I think that the ways in which, access to firearms, because of the location of Camden County and the city of Camden, would be interesting to look at because, we're right on the border we're close to Delaware, and then we're right across from Philadelphia. And as we know, like the differences in state policies around permitting and tracking would impact how people get guns. But I don't think the overall trends would be vastly different in terms of who's being affected by intimate partner violence and the use of firearms in those instances. Okay, I think we have about 2 more minutes. So if anyone has any other questions, pop them in the chat. Otherwise, email me another time if any ideas for collaboration or future research. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to me this afternoon. And I hope everyone, if you're on the East Coast, has a good, stays cool in this impending heat wave. Thanks, Celine. Also, I'm laughing to myself because all my coworkers can see I still always have 5,000 tabs up, no matter what I'm doing. And everyone's always like, doesn't that freak you out? And I'm like, no.
Great job, Devon. Sorry that the moderator had some tech issues partway through, but I'm back at the last second to tell everybody that I appreciate you tuning in. I appreciate Devon, you doing a great presentation and also the great questions of the audience.